This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masfer. Before I start the episode, I want to remind you guys to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, so you get those alerts on your phone when we drop an episode, and also to leave a 5-star review. That would be really appreciated as well. Also, don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. If you're on social media, we're also on social media. Make sure to follow that as well. We have a fantastic show for you guys today. We're finally getting some specific dates on when sports are returning. It appears that the MLS is going to return first on July 8th, followed by baseball. If they reach an agreement, it looks like the MLB is hoping to reach an agreement on that really soon. There's been some rumors flying around that will be around the July 10th to July 14th or 15th range is when opening day will hopefully happen for Major League Baseball. And of course, the NBA is right now on pace to start July 30th, but obviously there's been some stories about that as well. So we're going to get into all that today. We're going to start off with some Colin Kaepernick, some make-or-break season for NFL players and coaches that I came up with, as well as, like I mentioned before, we're going to talk about, is the NBA going to come back? They have a specific date they'd like to, but there's been some players voicing their concerns, as we heard some reports yesterday, so I'll get into that as well. And finally, stick around to the end of the show to make sure you hear my top 10 NBA players of all time. After the Michael Jordan documentary came out, Magic Johnson announced the documentary is coming. There's going to be a lot more debate on who is the greatest player of all time or the greatest players of all time, so I'm going to give my personal top 10 list at the end of the show, so make sure you stick around for that. But let's start off with the headline. So yesterday, or really over the past couple of days, Colin Kaepernick has been gaining some steam about will he be signed by an NFL team. The NFL obviously came out and apologized after that player video came out, asking the NFL to do more social justice work, things like that. Obviously, they pledged to donate, I think, $250 million over the next 10 years. So Colin Kaepernick's a topic again, and I'm not going to get into the politics. You can have your own opinion on that. I want to talk about this basically from solely a football perspective, how he would be on the field, some teams that might be interested. So obviously, it said there was a report yesterday that came out that Pete Carroll, the head coach of Seattle Seahawks, actually got a call from another NFL team asking how Colin Kaepernick looked in 2017. Now, Colin Kaepernick has been out of the league since the end of I believe, the 2016 season. So Colin Kaepernick, obviously, after leaving the San Francisco 49ers, wasn't signed by any team, which is why he's still currently a free agent. He's been out of the NFL for about 4 years now. But he did work out pretty much right after he left the San Francisco 49ers. He decided to work out. Them and the Seahawks had a tryout. No deal was obviously reached, but Pete Carroll was really the last person to see Colin Kaepernick before he, has been out of the league for all this time. And he apparently got a call from an undisclosed team asking how Colin looked in 2017, how was his, conditioning, his arm, things like that. And obviously Colin Kaepernick, relatively recently, within the last year, had that workout in Atlanta that was supposed to be sponsored by the NFL, but it got kind of confused. Colin wanted to record it and broadcast it, I believe, on YouTube. The NFL wanted to be more private. But he did actually have a workout, I believe, in an Atlanta high school for NFL teams to see. So he's picking up, and if you ask me, there's some real steam pushing towards Colin Kaepernick actually being signed by a team, and I think it'd be great for the league. I think it'd be obviously great for him. I think he deserves another shot to play football if he's a football player. And so I just want to start off with, here's Colin Kaepernick's career passing yards. So this is what it is. Over 12,000 yards. So Colin Kaepernick for a career had 12,271 yards, 72 touchdowns to only 30 interceptions, and a 60% completion percentage. Now, That's actually really good. And a lot of people underrate Colin Kaepernick because I think the way that his San Francisco career ended, he obviously went to that Super Bowl after winning the NFC Championship game. He had that huge game against the Green Bay Packers. That's unbelievable. He had like over 300 passing yards, over 150 rushing yards. It was one of the best playoff performances, I think, of all time. Colin Kaepernick, sort of after that Super Bowl, the San Francisco 49ers were never really the same. Jim Harbaugh left for Michigan, obviously, after a couple seasons after the Super Bowl. So it didn't really end on the greatest note from a football perspective-wise. Obviously, everything with the politics as well. So let's just go look at Colin Kaepernick's last year in the NFL. Colin Kaepernick's last year in the NFL, he only started 11 games for the 49ers. He passed for 2,241 yards, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. So he had a 4-to-1 touchdown-interception ratio, which is elite quarterbacking, plus a 59% completion percentage, so pretty much staying on par with his career average. So the last we saw of Colin Kaepernick, he wasn't that bad at all. In fact, I would argue that that's pretty starting quarterback level. I don't know if that's elite quarterback stuff. You would have to see a full sample size. You know, you would like to see those touchdowns maybe up in the 20 range for 11 games. But the 4 interceptions is incredible. A 4-to-1 touchdown interception rate is good for any quarterback. Patrick Mahomes would love to have that. I don't even think he has that. So now we fast forward to 4 years later. Colin Kaepernick is trying to enter the league again. He hasn't made it publicly, obviously. It's like I said earlier, it's building momentum that someone's going to sign him, and I think somebody actually will sign him. And I've got a list of a couple of teams that I think would actually offer Colin Kaepernick a good chance to maybe compete for either a starting job, and then there's also some teams in there that he'd be a perfect backup for as well. So let's just get right into it. The first one up, it's pretty much the obvious answer onto what everybody believes should give Colin Kaepernick a chance, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars are expected to be the worst team in the league next season. I've said it. I think they're probably tanking for Trevor Lawrence, the Clemson quarterback. A lot of people believe that they offer Colin Kaepernick the best opportunity to play, and you can definitely argue that. You know, they're starting Gardner Minshew next year, who had a really, I don't want to say good season last year, but definitely an electric season last year. He was a fun player to watch. So assuming that he's going to be the starting quarterback of the team, the backup for the Jacksonville Jaguars is Josh Dobbs, who hasn't really had a major NFL career, done anything major in the league. I don't think he has a career start. So if you think that I could argue that the Jacksonville Jaguars could sign Colin Kaepernick, bring him in to compete with Gardner Minshew, at worst, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, he helps Gardner Minshew as a veteran, not only as a veteran, but also just when there's competition in the NFL, you want every position to have competition so your starters get better. I believe when the Chicago Bears traded for Nick Foles, their GM or their coach, Matt Nagy, said that at worst that this helps Mitch Trubisky get better, light a fire under his, whatever, to make sure that he improves day in, day out. That could be Colin Kaepernick to Gardner Minshew. Also, Colin Kaepernick would fit well with the Jacksonville team. There's not a lot around them, but the NFL is clearly moving to more, mobile quarterback style. Put your best athlete at the quarterback position. We've seen that with Russell Wilson. We've seen that with, obviously, Lamar Jackson. We've seen that not only with those two players, but, even Taysom Hill for the Saints. Some people believe he's the answer after Drew Brees. So you've seen that if you put your best, most athletic player at the quarterback position, that's something that you can have. Colin Kaepernick is 6'4", perfect size. Obviously can run. We know that for a fact. We saw him run all the time in the NFL. Had over 2,000 career rushing yards, over 13 touchdowns in his career as a rusher as well. So he's a dual threat. And I really do believe that he can still impact an NFL team. He claims that he hasn't, really altered his day-to-day. He's still working out like an NFL player. Obviously, I watched some highlights earlier of that workout that he did in Atlanta, and he looks good. His arm has always been a strong arm. There's a lot of times where athletic quarterbacks don't have the strongest arms and they do more with their legs than their arm. That's not the case in Colin Kaepernick. He throws a wicked fastball. I think he probably throws the fastest football in quite some time. I would put Kyler Murray up there maybe as well. But when you compare him to the NFL, I would even argue that he fits today's game more than he did when he was actually, in his prime with the San Francisco 49ers with this new mobile, college kind of offense style. So the Jacksonville Jaguars would make a lot of sense to me. Not to mention they have the only minority owner in the NFL who's been big on political activism as well. Also, the Jacksonville Jaguars have to play like 2 games in London every single year just to drive up, ticket revenue. They don't have the strongest fan bases. Colin Kaepernick would obviously help in that regard as well with jerseys and things like that. So it'd be really interesting to see. And also it would make the Jaguars really must-watch television. If Colin Kaepernick got an opportunity to start for the Jacksonville Jaguars, there would be a lot of people tuning in for those games to see how he would do. So Jacksonville right now, I would say, is the number one option. I think Colin, if he would want to pick a team as well, if he's focused on playing time, if that's the number one thing he wants, if he wants to return to the NFL, the Jaguars would definitely offer him the most. Now, for another team that I think that Colin Kaepernick would fit well with is the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Pittsburgh Steelers has been Ben Roethlisberger's franchise for as long as I can remember. He's obviously their quarterback one. If Colin Kaepernick were to be signed by the Steelers, it wouldn't be a threat, wouldn't be a competition like it might be with Jacksonville or some other teams I'm going to mention later on. But Big Ben is coming off a major elbow surgery. He's been hurt all the time when he's out in his career. He actually only averages 13 games a season. So Big Ben's career average, he usually misses about 3 games a year. So if you need a capable backup in Pittsburgh, I think Colin Kaepernick would be a great option. Now, we saw what happened last year with the Pittsburgh Steelers when Big Ben went down. They went off with Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, and it did not work out. If they had better quarterback play, you could really argue that the Pittsburgh Steelers would have made the playoffs last season. But due to their inability at quarterback with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph, that defense really had to carry them, which ended up going 8-8, missing the playoffs by about a game. If you had a better backup quarterback last season, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers would have made the playoffs. If you had Colin Kaepernick as the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers last year, I think they would have made the playoffs. I really do believe that Colin Kaepernick is at least worth 1 win more than a Mason Rudolph, than a Duck Hodges, even though he's been out of the league for 3 years. If he's in shape, knows the playbook, does what he's always done throughout his life, which is be a football player, I really do believe he could impact the Pittsburgh Steelers, or really any other team, on winning football games. So the Steelers make a lot of sense for me because we don't know how Big Ben's going to return when he comes back. They play in a really hard division, so if Big Ben did get hurt, the Pittsburgh Steelers obviously have a great defense, but not only them. The Baltimore Ravens have an incredible defense. They upgraded with getting Calais Campbell. You already know the Cleveland Browns are super talented, maybe one of the most talented teams in the league, have an incredibly talented defensive front with Myles Garrett. So it's going to be really tough for Big Ben to really get acclimated. He's not going to have that much time in the pocket. Things like that. So if we were to see Big Ben miss, I'm not saying the whole season, but maybe, 3-4 games like he usually does every single year. If you're a Steelers fan, do you really want to turn over those 3 to 4 games to a Mason Rudolph, to a Duck Hodges? You saw how it went last year. It went extremely poorly. They couldn't even decide on which one really to go with. Now bring in Colin Kaepernick. An athlete, strong arm, throws, with velocity to get through those tough Pittsburgh wins, the cold conditions. He's played in big moments before. If it's down the stretch in the season or even a playoff game, we know what Colin Kaepernick could be. He could be a starting level quarterback in the NFL again. Could be a Pro Bowl level quarterback like he was with San Francisco. I would like to see the Steelers pick up Colin Kaepernick. If I had to pick any of these teams, I'm going to mention some other ones later on, but I definitely think the Steelers would be my favorite option for them to go with. I think that's a perfect match. Again, Big Ben gets hurt, Colin Kaepernick steps in. Even if he doesn't win all 4 games that Big Ben would supposedly miss, hypothetically, if he wins 2 of them, that could be the difference between the Steelers making and missing the playoffs. All right, next up I have the New England Patriots, who obviously are one of the few teams that appear to have a starting quarterback void in the NFL. They've backed Stidham. They think Stidham could potentially be the answer. I saw a poll that, I think 32% of the Patriots fans believe that Stidham is the future, while another 52% believe he's just a stopgap. In my opinion, he's just a stopgap. I think he's going to be replaced after this season with somebody from the draft, somebody like a Trey Lance, somebody like a Justin Fields, somewhere around those lines. But if you bring in Colin Kaepernick to the New England Patriots, it's a really interesting dynamic. Now, Josh McDaniels has a history with mobile quarterbacks. If you remember, he coached Tim Tebow, who was the head coach in Denver during that Tebow miraculous run. So he has experience coaching a mobile quarterback. Not to mention that the Patriots have, experimented a little bit with the mobile quarterback. They obviously signed Tim Tebow all those years ago, even though I think he was cut in training camp. And it's been reports, coming out that this Patriot offense, even while Brady has left, is going to be completely remade. It's going to be completely different. It's going to be more moving the pocket. Stidham's obviously way more mobile than Brady was. I wouldn't say he's as mobile as, Colin Kaepernick or those other dual threat quarterbacks. I wouldn't label Stidham that way. But the backup quarterback right now to Jarrett Stidham, assuming he starts, is Brian Hoyer, who I think this is his 3rd stint with the New England Patriots. Hasn't really done anything ever. is a nice player, a nice veteran. He's had some moments. I think when he was on the Browns, he might have actually won a game or two, if I remember correctly. You know, he's been this sort of classic backup that can run the system, not to obviously to Tom Brady's level, but in a similar style and a similar fashion. So if you ask me, that is not a great quarterback room, and I don't think Stidham is the answer. Bill Belichick has always struggled in the NFL, if you just look throughout his coaching career, against mobile quarterbacks. If you want to find a weakness in his defense, which has usually been fantastic over the past, 20 years or so, mobile quarterbacks has been that weakness, has been that way you can exploit the Patriots defense over the years. We saw Lamar Jackson completely tear them up last year. Even in years past, I think Colin Kaepernick probably tore up the New England Patriots before, Michael Vick, other mobile guys like that really make the defense struggle. So maybe Bill Belichick, after all these years of seeing his defense be destroyed by mobile quarterbacks, could, try and see how a mobile quarterback would do. Whether that's with the draft, with a Justin Fields, a Trey Lance, two mobile guys, or Colin Kaepernick this year, I think it'd be a really interesting dynamic for the New England Patriots. Colin Kaepernick's also a guy who I don't think would shy away from the pressure of replacing Tom Brady. That's something I fear with Jarrett Stidham. I know he learned under Brady last year, but, that's a big factor. The expectation for the New England Patriots is always high, like an all-time high. I don't think Patriots fans have an expectation that Jarrett Stidham should win the Super Bowl this year, but I do think there's a lot of Patriots fans that believe that the Patriots should make the playoffs this year, that this isn't a rebuilding year, that this is a retool and attack again and win, 9-10 games and make the playoffs and win the AFC East. I don't think Stidham is capable of doing that. Do I think Colin Kaepernick is capable of doing that? If it's the Colin Kaepernick from San Francisco, absolutely. I don't know if that's what we're going to get through Colin Kaepernick if he actually does return to the NFL, but it would be really interesting to see him in the Patriots. Another team that I listed here, we're now getting into the range of, not as likely as the three teams I mentioned before, but still some options that make sense. And that's the Atlanta Falcons. Matt Ryan is getting up there. I believe he's 38 years old. He's never really had any injury history, though, so this is, why it makes it a little bit more unrealistic. The backup to Matt Ryan is Matt Schaub, who obviously spent a lot of time with the Texans as their starting quarterback. I believe he actually has a playoff win that year. I think the Bengals made the playoffs 3 straight years in a row, and they obviously faced the Texans, I think, all 3 years. I think Matt Schaub actually won one of those playoff games. So he is a capable backup. He's a veteran. It's one of the older quarterback rooms in the league, if not the oldest. I would like to see Colin Kaepernick come into the Atlanta Falcons. There's obviously some Atlanta ties. He had that workout with the NFL in Atlanta. I'm not sure if he lives in Atlanta or anything like that, but there's definitely some sort of connection there. The Falcons have been kind of stagnant on this downward trend ever since the Super Bowl collapse happened against the Patriots. They haven't made the playoffs since. Not saying that Colin Kaepernick would start for the Atlanta Falcons, but I think he'd be a better backup option than Matt Schaub to Matt Ryan. And if Matt Ryan got hurt, if Matt Ryan continued to struggle, Colin Kaepernick would be a great option there. Also, the Atlanta Falcons would probably offer him one of the best offensive weapons he could go to of any team he would sign with, obviously unless he decided to sign with the Chiefs or something like that. The Falcons obviously have Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, now Todd Gurley. So things like that would obviously help Colin Kaepernick if he were to sign with a team, in comparison to the Jaguars, who don't have a lot of offensive weapons. All right, my next team, this might be the most unlikely option, but I think it'd be really cool to see, is Colin Kaepernick actually returning to the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I know you're going to say they just went to a Super Bowl last year. They have Jimmy Garoppolo. It makes absolutely zero sense. Well, can you name the backup for the San Francisco 49ers right now? I'll tell you it right now. It's Nick Mullins, who's okay. He's a young kid. I believe when Jimmy G went down, he was the starting quarterback for them about a year and a half ago. He did fine. He did all right. I think Colin Kaepernick would be a better backup to Jimmy Garoppolo, who clearly has injury history. He obviously played the whole year this year, but the year before that he tore his ACL. Year before that he was hurt as well. And even going back to his Patriots days, the year Tom Brady got suspended for those 4 games for Deflategate, Jimmy Garoppolo only played 2 of those games before hurting his shoulder and missing the remaining 2. So Jimmy Garoppolo isn't the most healthy quarterback. You could consider him injury prone. A reunion with Colin Kaepernick, that would be really cool to see. Colin Kaepernick would also be able to go to a really good team in San Francisco, return there, kind of make amends. I think that would be really cool. It's completely unlikely and probably won't happen, but that's kind of a dream scenario for me. And the final team I want to talk about that has, a chance to sign Colin Kaepernick is the Houston Texans, and I'm going to give this a dark horse team. So we see a lot of times in the NFL when it comes to backup quarterbacks, you want your backup quarterback to emulate the starting quarterback in the way that they play and their play style. That way, if the quarterback does go down, you don't have to change the system. And obviously some of the teams I mentioned before, Colin Kaepernick doesn't apply to with the mobile quarterback thing. But that rule would definitely apply with Colin Kaepernick and the potential of him going to the Houston Texans. He plays extremely similar to Deshaun Watson. And obviously Deshaun Watson wasn't in the league when Colin Kaepernick was. But if you watch, what I did was I watched some game tape of Colin Kaepernick. Specifically his last year. I wanted to see if the zip was still there, the arm strength. It all was still there, obviously, in his last year. I mentioned the stats earlier. He played a lot like Deshaun Watson with his escapability, his big arm, his strong arm, his velocity, the way he throws the football, his footwork. I could really see a really good match made between the Houston Texans and a potential backup with Colin Kaepernick. And Deshaun Watson, obviously, he hasn't missed a ton of games in his career. He obviously missed that half a season with a torn ACL, but he does get hurt a lot. He plays hurt a lot. He's a tough guy. He played, obviously, with, I believe, that chest or rib issue that prohibited him from even flying on a plane. He had to drive all the way to the playoff game. Crazy stuff like that. If Deshaun Watson were to go down, hopefully he wouldn't, obviously, Colin Kaepernick would be a perfect system fit for the Houston Texans on how they run their offense and things like that. But I want to talk about quickly, to end this segment, obviously those are some teams, I'll say the list again, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New England Patriots, Atlanta Falcons, San Francisco 49ers, Houston Texans. Those are the teams that I believe, could really offer Colin Kaepernick a good chance to either be a starter or a high-level backup or would fit systematically. But it's tough. It's going to be hard for Colin Kaepernick to make it in this league again. Not to mention, forget about the politics, but from a football standpoint, he's been out of the league for 4 years. We don't know what shape he's in. His rust is going to be huge, and it's to no fault of his own. He just hasn't seen live game action, hasn't even really seen live practice action. Even if he's been working out with some of his friends who are NFL players, it's still not enough to simulate real practices. And not to mention, we are in one of the biggest and best eras of NFL quarterbacking I have ever seen. If you go down the line and you look at some teams who don't have an answer at quarterback this year, it's really just the Jaguars and the Patriots. And some fans of both of those organizations believe they do. Some Jacksonville Jaguar fans believe Gardner Minshew's the answer. Some Patriots fans believe Stead Sims the answer. Every other team down the line either has a veteran quarterback that they've trusted for a long time who's been there forever, a new veteran quarterback, Colts have Phillip Rivers, Bears have Nick Foles, things like that. Or they just drafted a quarterback, have a young quarterback already there, who everyone believes is their guy for the franchise for the long term. So it's really hard to see Colin Kaepernick getting a starting job. That's why I mentioned a lot of teams of him potentially being a backup. And not to mention that right now this league is so good at quarterbacking. No one's even giving Cam Newton a shot, who's a former MVP, obviously with some injury history. So it's really hard to see guys like Colin Kaepernick, who've been out of the league for 4 years, getting that chance to be a starter again. But Colin Kaepernick can absolutely be a high-level backup if he gets in shape, knows the playbook, like I mentioned earlier. I believe that Colin Kaepernick could be better than Matt Schaub, could be better than Nick Mullins, better than A.J. McCarron, who's the backup of the Texans, better than Josh Dobb, the backups of the Jaguars, better than Brian Hoyer, the backup of the Patriots, better than Mason Rudolph, the backup of the Steelers, better than Chad Henne, the backup of the Chiefs. Just the list goes on, and I really do believe Colin Kaepernick deserves a second chance with an NFL team. I believe he'll get it. It's, increasing obviously with all these reports that, a team is starting to lean towards to sign him. If I had to bet money on who signed him, this is a really hard bet because really any team could sign him. If I had to bet money on the team that would sign him, I would say the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Pittsburgh Steelers would be my two. But watch out for the Houston Texans as a dark horse team. I really do believe that the Texans have interest in Colin Kaepernick as a potential backup, and he would be great. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but on the other side of the break, I'm going to be giving you some NFL players and NFL coaches who might be on the hot seat this season, make or break year for them. And don't forget, at the end of the show, I'm also going to be giving you my top 10 NBA players of all time, so make sure you stick around for that as well.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Thank you so much for listening so far. You know, I just got finished talking about Colin Kaepernick, and one of the reasons why it's going to be so difficult for him to potentially get on an NFL team is because how good the level of, quarterback play has been over the past, really 10 years, ever since, the more draft picks are hitting, the top picks are hitting, teams are finding quarterbacks, their franchise guys in the later rounds, Cowboys with Dak Prescott in the 4th, Russell Wilson, Seahawks in the 3rd. So things like that hurt players like Colin Kaepernick and even a Cam Newton from getting, back into the NFL level and producing at that high level again and getting that starting opportunity. So I wanted to continue that conversation with some NFL quarterbacks and also some head coaches who are on the hot seat going into this new NFL season. So let's just get right into it. Number one, might become a little bit of a surprise, is Baker Mayfield. I think he's actually on the hot seat this year. So Baker Mayfield, obviously quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, set the world on fire his rookie season. This is actually going to end up being, however, his 3rd coach in as many years he's been in the league, 3. Each of the past 2 times the Browns have struggled, it has appeared that the Browns organization has pointed the finger at, the management, the general manager, John Dorsey, or head coach, Freddie Kitchens. I don't think that's going to be this case this time. It's clear that the new management in Cleveland really, really likes Kevin Stefanski. When they got rid of John Dorsey, the Browns got rid of John Dorsey, they just hired from within, and it was rumored that the person who they promoted actually wanted Kevin Stefanski over a year ago when they were doing the head coaching search after they ended up giving it to Freddie Kitchens. So Kevin Stefanski has a lot of fans in the Browns building, and you can argue there's more fans of Kevin Stefanski in the Browns building than there is Baker Mayfield. So last year, Baker Mayfield obviously regressed as the whole Browns kind of team didn't really meet expectations, Baker included. Last year, Baker threw for 3,827 yards, 22 touchdowns. All that sounds great. Then you get to the 21 interceptions, and he obviously regressed in completion percentage as well. That's something that's just not great. People make fun of Jameis Winston for throwing 30 touchdowns, 30 picks. Baker Mayfield threw 22 touchdowns and 21 interceptions. Extremely similar touchdown-interception ratio than Jameis Winston. Winston's a backup. Baker Mayfield's considered a starting franchise-level quarterback. Blame the coach, blame whoever you want, but it's no secret that Cleveland has talent. Not only do they have talent, it seems like they're almost like the Noah's Ark of NFL teams. They have 2 of everything. They have 2 receivers. They have Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham Jr., 2 running backs, Kareem Hunt, and Nick Chubb, who's one of the top backs in the league. 2 tight ends now, Austin Hooper and David Njoku. They have 2 of everything, it seems like, on offense. They addressed both tackle positions this year, signing Jack Conklin as a right tackle, bringing him over from Tennessee, one of the better right tackles in the league. And they drafted Jedrick Wills, who, in my opinion, might have actually been the best left tackle in the entire draft coming out of Alabama. Or at least maybe the most pro-ready besides maybe Andrew Thomas of Georgia. So they really addressed everything Baker Mayfield needed. They got him an offensive coach in Kevin Stefanski, who's respectable, did wonders with Kirk Cousins, did wonders with Case Keenum as well, and I'll get to that in a minute. But it's a make or break year for Baker Mayfield. If Baker Mayfield had a similar, let's just say he replicates this year with a little bit of improvement. Let's say he gets to over 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and gets that interceptions to just 18 or 19. Is that enough for Browns fans, let's say they miss the playoffs, is that enough for Browns fans to be absolutely convinced that Baker Mayfield is still the starting level quarterback of the Cleveland Browns? I'm not so sure about that. And if Kevin Stefanski wanted to move on and bring somebody else in, someone who, maybe fits his system more, even though I do think Baker Mayfield fits it pretty well, that's a really interesting conversation that we can have. And, the backup currently for Baker Mayfield is Case Keenum, who obviously Kevin Stefanski had wonders with. I think they went 13-3 that season, the year of the Minneapolis Miracle. Awesome season for the Vikings. Kevin Stefanski's probably best coaching, job up to date. And if you ask me, Baker Mayfield is a very, very similar quarterback to Case Keenum. I think Baker Mayfield's more talented than Case Keenum. But this sort of level of, a skillful game manager, a good distributor, not the strongest arm, I think Baker Mayfield is that. Now, I do think, while this is a make-or-break year for Baker Mayfield, I think it's going to be a good year for him. I believe the Browns are going to make the playoffs. I like Kevin Stefanski. I like the system he's running. Like I mentioned before, I think this team is extremely, extremely similar to that 13-3 Minnesota Vikings team from a couple of years ago. I don't think they're going to go 13-3 like those Vikings teams did. I think the Browns are going to in that 10-6, 11-5 range, considering how hard their division is. But if you ask me, if Baker Mayfield doesn't show big steps this year, especially with a good quarterback class next year, you can definitely make the argument that the Browns could potentially move off from him. All right, next up is a quarterback going into his second year, and that's Washington Redskins quarterback Dwayne Haskins. He was almost replaced this year. Redskins fans don't want to believe it, but there was serious talk that the Redskins could take Tua Tagovailoa, the second overall pick. They obviously went Chase Young, who is probably the most surefire 100% success rate prospect in this entire draft. Immediate impact, Nick Bosa type, fantastic absolute defensive end edge rusher. So that was the right pick. But with a good quarterback class next year, Dwayne Haskins only started in 9 games. He had 1,365 yards, which is actually pretty low for almost 10 games. 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. That's a high interception rate. You threw 7 picks in 9 games. Low touchdown rate, 7 touchdowns in 9 games. So not the greatest rookie season. Dwayne Haskins definitely showed flashes. He's a pretty good prospect. He came out of Ohio State. I think he was, supposed to go higher. A lot of people thought he should go to the Giants. Giants obviously went Daniel Jones. Kyler Murray went first overall. So he ended up being the 3rd quarterback taken in his class. I don't see it with Dwayne Haskins. I don't see this it factor. I know he was getting some Big Ben comparisons coming out of college. And I guess I could see it. Like Baker Mayfield, he's a pretty good distributor, pretty accurate. He definitely has a big arm, but I'm definitely not sold on Dwayne Haskins, especially with a new regime coming in, coming from the Panthers. Ron Rivera, experienced coach, knows what it takes to get to a Super Bowl. I think he almost decided this year to take a quarterback, and I think next year, if Dwayne Haskins doesn't make a big leap from year 1 to year 2, the Redskins could really be looking for a quarterback next year. And I honestly could see the Redskins already looking ahead to a Trey Lance, to a Justin Fields. Ron Rivera, obviously, coming from Carolina, played with Cam Newton, Coach Cam Newton, knows the mobile system, maybe prefers a mobile quarterback. That's not Dwayne Haskins. That is somebody like a Trey Lance out of NDSU or Justin Fields out of Ohio State. So keep an eye on that. So out of the 2 that I just mentioned, I think Baker Mayfield will have a big year. I don't think Dwayne Haskins is going to have a big year. So out of the 2, make it break it. All right, next up is Gardner Minshew, who I'm actually a pretty big fan of. He's an energetic player. He's awesome. If you asked me personally, who would I rather have, Gardner Minshew or Dwayne Haskins, I'm really, really tempted to say Gardner Minshew, even though their draft, rounds are completely different. So let's just compare the 2 real quick. So like I mentioned before, Dwayne Haskins, 7 touchdowns, 7 picks. Gardner Minshew had 21 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Yes, he started more games, but he also threw less interceptions. So if you're going by that comparison, and yes, it is a make it year for Gardner Minshew. The Jaguars are expected, like I mentioned in the previous segment, to be the worst team in the league, probably going after Trevor Lawrence. If Gardner Minshew doesn't leave this incredible impression with the fans, the front office, the coaching staff, then it's going to be really hard for him to retain the starting job. Not that they won't keep him. I'm sure they'll keep him as a cheap backup. But he needs to do everything in his power to not only win the Jaguars enough games to be out of the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes, but also make a good enough impression that if they were to get, a Justin Fields or Trey Lance or Trevor Lawrence, that he can persuade the organization to not take one of those guys and stick with him. Gardner Minshew had a really good year last year, actually. He had 3,271 yards, so he had a low yardage, but he had high touchdowns. He had 21 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. So he threw just as many touchdowns almost as Baker Mayfield with only 6 interceptions. I really like Gardner Minshew. He's accurate, doesn't have the biggest arm. He's pretty conservative at quarterback, given his personality is so electric. He doesn't throw interceptions. He would be one of the top backups in the league, in my opinion. I think he's a good starting quarterback. I just don't see him being a starting quarterback that can lift a franchise and a team that has virtually no talent around him to that next level, to be a playoff contender or even like a 5 or 6 win team. I think that's the Jaguars max. It's a 6-win season. I don't think they're going to get it. I think they're probably going to win 2 or 3 max to get, Trevor Lawrence. I think that's what the franchise wants. I think that's what some of the fans want. But, Gardner Minshew, it's definitely a make or break year for him as well. Next up is Jarrett Stidham, who's presumed to be the next Patriots quarterback, come after Tom Brady. Like I mentioned in the last segment, fans are split on whether they think whether they think Jarrett Stidham is just a stopgap quarterback or if he's, this heir to Tom Brady, a Steve Young to Joe Montana, and that's not what's going to happen in my opinion. But similar to Gardner Minshew, Jarrett Stidham has to make an impression on the Patriots fans, the Patriots coaching staff, the Patriots front office, who all have high expectations of how their team should be on why he should be the future of the New England Patriots. You know the Patriots are going to come with a great defense. You know the Patriots are going to have one of the best coaching staffs, if not the best. Great ownership top to down with Robert Kraft. So now if the team doesn't perform well, if they don't win the division, if they do go 6-10, who are the fans going to blame? Well, they're immediately going to go to Jarrett Stidham and they're going to say, we don't have a good quarterback, we need a new quarterback. So, in my opinion, Jarrett Stidham obviously didn't play last year. There's no stats to go off of how he is going to do. If I had to try to visualize in your head what he's going to look like, I think he plays very similarly to Sam Darnold, who's actually in the division with the New York Jets. He's pretty mobile, not a dual threat, definitely has some escapability, can move the pocket. He's got a pretty good arm, in the short to medium range, he's pretty accurate. There's not a lot of tape to go off of with the long ball. Didn't throw a lot of long balls in college either, for either Auburn or Baylor, the two colleges he went to during his collegiate career. But if Jarrett Stidham doesn't have even, the bar for Jarrett Stidham is so high because he can't have a normal rookie season. So, he can't have what Dwayne Haskins just had, which is 7 touchdowns, 7 picks. Or that touchdown interception ratio. He can't have a 1-to-1 TD to INT rate going into the season. He'll just be replaced by whoever the Patriots want to draft. He needs to have a season, even like Gardner Minshew's rookie season with the 21 touchdowns and 6 picks. Then maybe some people would consider it. But I don't even think Jarrett Stidham is capable of reaching that level either. So it's going to be really tough for Jarrett Stidham to convince the Patriot fan base and the Patriot ownership who have such a high expectation, given the 6 Super Bowl rings, given some people believe the dynasty isn't over, they want to keep going. So I think it's going to be really hard for him as well. All right, so the next 3, I have 3 more quarterbacks, and I'll get into some coaches who are on the hot seat. But for the last 3 quarterbacks, these are probably the biggest surprises on who I believe are on the hot seat. So number 1 is Aaron Rodgers. Now, you're probably looking at me like I'm crazy. How is Aaron Rodgers on the hot seat? Aaron Rodgers is one of the greatest, most talented quarterbacks of all time. Yes, he's getting up there in age, but he hasn't shown real aggression. And that's where I'm going to argue with you. So, obviously in the draft with the 26th pick, the Green Bay Packers decided to select Jordan Love, a young, electric arm. Actually plays very similar to Aaron Rodgers. I wouldn't say he's as talented by any stretch of the imagination, but plays a very similar style as a young Aaron Rodgers. More of a gunslinger, elastic arm, can throw it anywhere on the field, strong arm, good touch, makes those wow plays that not everybody can make. Was really a wild card draft prospect, big boomer bust, similar to how Patrick Mahomes was compared to, not saying he's going to be Patrick Mahomes or anything like that, but similar draft profiles. Now, when you draft a quarterback, it's not a surprise you want to get them out there as soon as possible. Yes, Green Bay has done this before. Yes, they drafted Aaron Rodgers when Brett Favre was still the quarterback. At the same age, actually. Both Aaron and Brett were, I believe, 35 or 36 when their replacements, quote-unquote, were drafted. Now, one of the things that head coach Matt LaFleur, after coming off his first year, said was that our offense needs to have more explosive plays and take more risks. Now, young Aaron Rodgers was explosive, would make these big plays, wouldn't give up on a play, things like that. Now, this new Aaron Rodgers that we've seen over the past couple of years is different. Yes, on paper, Aaron Rodgers' stats look incredible. 4,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions, which is absolutely ridiculous. Obviously, the Packers went 13-3, NFC Championship game. But the Packers weren't as good as you think. When you really look at their ratings, their defense was great early in the season, fell off late. Their offense was decent early in the season, never really got any better from there. They just won a lot of close games, a lot of one-score games, which isn't a long-term winning solution. Now, Matt LaFleur is right. They need more explosive plays, they need less checkdowns, they need more touchdowns, less field goals. That's all correct. Now, let me hit you with a stat from Aaron Rodgers' season last year. He actually led the entire National Football League in throwaways by a landslide. He had 27 more throwaways than the second-place person. Now, which was Phillip Rivers, which is absolutely insane to think about how Aaron Rodgers leads the league in throwaways when we're so used to seeing him run around, extend the pocket, make these absolute wild plays. Now, Jordan Love, some people say, play style-wise, reminds me, personally, of a Patrick Mahomes, an Aaron Rodgers, never giving up on a play, gunslinger attitude, go big or go home. So it does not surprise me at all that Matt LaFleur loved Jordan Love as a prospect. They traded up for him, and they probably want to get him out there sooner rather than later. So no way does Jordan Love play this year. He'll get the full year to sit. But if Aaron Rodgers doesn't have, a team success repeating of last year, if the team definitely, the Packers can't take a step back, Aaron Rodgers can't take a step back, because as soon as Aaron Rodgers shows some major step of, declining, I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers decided to trade him and get picks, maybe after this year, or definitely after 2 years from now. They're eventually going to want to get Jordan Love out there. So while it's hard to believe that, Aaron Rodgers' job is in jeopardy, it's definitely not in jeopardy immediately this year, but definitely down the line in the future, I would not be surprised at all if Aaron Rodgers, could be replaced soon by Jordan Love. All right, so I got two more for you guys. Two more quarterbacks, and I'll quickly do a runoff of coaches as well. Jared Goff, I think, is also on the hot seat. Went to the Super Bowl with the Rams. A lot of people didn't think it was because of Jared Goff, because of the offensive system. Jared Goff is definitely a system quarterback. His stats last year, almost 5,000 yards, 4,638 yards, 22 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. Interceptions were an all-time high for him, career high. He obviously, the Rams overall struggled due to the poor offensive line play. They didn't really shore that up in the offseason. They lost Todd Gurley. That whole mess was also overlooming the team. So it's really tough for me to see Jared Goff, hopefully having he'll probably have a similar season this year. I do think they will improve because I think the Rams will improve. I also think the Rams play in the hardest division in football, man. I mean, you're going against San Francisco, who just went to the Super Bowl, Seattle Seahawks, who have a top 3 quarterback in the league, Russell Wilson. On top of that, you have to face the new and improved Arizona Cardinals twice a year. Kyler Murray's only going to get better. Traded for DeAndre Hopkins. And it's going to be crazy. Their defense is only going to get better since they drafted Isaiah Simmons, who was one of my favorite prospects in the draft. So it's going to be really hard for the Rams to reestablish themselves as dominant in the NFC West, and I don't see it happening. So if Jared Goff doesn't have a big year, especially like I keep mentioning, a loaded draft class at quarterback next year, Trevor Lawrence, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Newman from Georgia could also be a huge player as well as the 4th quarterback taken, the kid out of UNC as well. So it's going to be a big make or break year for Jared Goff. All right, for the last one of the quarterbacks, it's Matt Stafford of the Lions. So he obviously missed almost the entirety of last season. Lions struggled at the 3rd overall pick. It wouldn't surprise me, just like I keep saying for a lot of these veteran guys, if Matt Stafford doesn't have a big year this year, Lions continue to lose. Let's say the Lions get the 3rd overall pick again. Why keep paying Matt Stafford all this money, go in a full rebuild, draft Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Trevor Lawrence if you can get him, and restart this thing, trade Matt Stafford? I don't think it's completely out of the question at all, especially if his head coach gets fired, which I'll get into now. So quickly, I just want to go over some of the head coaches that I believe on the hot seat. Anthony Lynn of the Chargers needs to have a big year as well. They're probably not going to start Justin Herbert till late in the season, if at all. If he doesn't have a big year with Tyrod Taylor, don't be surprised if the Chargers move off of him. Next up, Doug Marrone. This is a pretty obvious one. I think he is going to get fired after this year, after the Jaguars have a poor season. I think the Jaguars are essentially, quote-unquote tanking for Trevor Lawrence, and when the season ends up, I think Doug Marrone will be let loose after a 2 or 3 win season. Dan Quinn, the Falcons, they haven't made the playoffs since the Super Bowl debacle, the 28-3 disaster. So I don't think that I think if Dan Quinn doesn't make the playoffs this year with Matt Ryan, the Falcons could go into a full rebuild mode. I didn't mention Matt Ryan as one of those guys in the hot seat because I think he's going to continue to put up numbers because of the offensive weapons around him. But if the Falcons again go 4-12, 5-11, 6-10, 8-8 even, Dan Quinn will probably be gone in my opinion. Next up is Matt Nagy. Out of all the guys I'm probably going to list on this, the head coach hot seat, I think he's least likely to get fired. I think he's built such a great team, him and the general manager there in Chicago. I think he's a great offensive mind. I really do believe he's been limited by Mitch Trubisky at quarterback. He got his guy Nick Foles, who I don't love, but he has worked with him in the past in Philly. So don't be surprised if there's some good, moments there with Matt Nagy and the Bears. I think they'll push for a playoff spot. Don't know if they'll make it, but if the Bears had an even worse year than last year, then I could definitely see Matt Nagy being on the outs of Chicago. The last two, Matt Patricia of the Lions, just like I mentioned with Matt Stafford, if the Lions don't have a good year, a rebound year, they have another poor season, I can almost guarantee you Matt Patricia's going to be fired. Probably go back to the New England coaching staff at this point. And I expect him to probably be relieved of his duties as well. And finally, might come a little bit as a surprise, but also not really at all. And that's Bill O'Brien of the Texans, who's also technically the general manager of the Texans. He's under the fire right now, actually, after trading DeAndre Hopkins, wondering who they're going to surround Deshaun Watson with. A lot of people disagree with the Nuke Hopkins trade. It wouldn't surprise me at all that if the Texans do take a step back because of trading DeAndre Hopkins and some the other guys they missed out on, then it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Texans decided to move on from Bill O'Brien, get Deshaun Watson a new head coach, and reboot the coaching staff. If I had to guess at the end of the season, this is kind of just a random prediction on who would be let go and which quarterbacks would be replaced out of all those guys I just mentioned for this entire segment. I would say probably Dwayne Haskins is probably going to get moved off on. I don't think the Redskins are going to have a good year, and I think Ron Rivera is going to want a mobile quarterback. I think Gardner Minshew will probably get replaced by Trevor Lawrence after the Jaguars have the worst season. Jarrett Stidham I don't think is going to live up to the Tom Brady succession hype, and I think he'll also be replaced. So those three quarterbacks I could definitely see are the ones I would bet on getting replaced. For head coaches who are probably going to get fired, Jacksonville Jaguars, Doug Marrone, Dan Quinn, Falcons, and probably Matt Patricia Lions. Those guys are all on the hot seat, and maybe even a little bit more. Like, it's going to be harder for them to prove themselves to their organization, to their fan base. All right, so we're going to take another break. Thank you guys so much for listening so far. Stay tuned. When we on the other side of the break, we're going to be talking about the new reports coming out about some players are not happy returning to Orlando in the bubble and what that means about the potential NBA returning. I'm also going to give you guys a tier list of the teams that qualified to be in the Orlando bubble overall. And stick around for the last segment. I'm going to be giving you guys my top 10 NBA players of all time. We'll be back right after this break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Thank you so much for tuning in so far. So the next thing I want to talk about is some news that broke yesterday about how some NBA players are not happy with the way that the NBA was returning, or really just that the NBA is returning at all. Some players were in favor of canceling the season. There's a report yesterday by Shams of Yahoo that Kyrie Irving actually led a call of 80-plus NBA players who were voicing their opinion on whether the NBA should come back, how they should come back, and Kyrie was in favor of actually not returning this season and not playing this season at all, or finishing it, really. So, if you ask me, I really do believe that the NBA is still going to get this season in. I know they've ratified everything. They haven't come with a concrete plan, July 30th. While there might be some players who decide to skip out for health reasons or for personal reasons or whatever, I still believe that a majority of the NBA players, a majority of the big NBA players are going to come back, and I'll tell you why. So there's a couple of factors of why I think the NBA is still going to get this season in. One thing is that the NBA doesn't want to waste this season simply because there's finally some parity. So over the past couple of years, NBA ratings have been up in the playoffs but down in the finals because of the lack of parity. It seems like it's been Golden State and the Cavs, and last year it was briefly Golden State versus Toronto, and it feels like it's been that way forever. This year we got some real parity in the NBA with multiple teams becoming, potential contenders, multiple teams going to make noise in the playoffs, things like that. And I don't think that the NBA wants to waste that with the jeopardy of that potentially, leaving next year due to free agency or trades or things like that. So that's one reason why I think that the NBA wants us back. They know that the ratings are going to be super high. They know that us sports fans have been dying and craving just for any sort of glimpse of sports to come back again. And considering that baseball will be back and the MLS will be back and their ratings will be really high, the NBA knows that they're going to want to do this. Also, if the NBA doesn't come back, there is going to be a huge loss of revenue, like in the billions, And if that is the case, that could trigger a clause in the current collective bargaining agreement, which is the agreement between the players' union and the owners, and how pretty much the NBA works, how the players get paid, percentages, things like that. The salary cap's in there as well. But now, if there's a huge loss of revenue in the billions, that could trigger a clause where the new collective bargaining agreement would actually have to be rewritten. And that would not be in favor of the players, especially if the players decided to be the ones who don't let this season continue. The owners, I believe, would take a really harsh stance on the new CBA, where players would get paid less, the supermax would go down, the contract money would go down, the guaranteed money would go down. And that's something that the players don't want. And the head of the players union currently right now is Chris Paul, and he's obviously in favor of returning from the season, so that makes a big impact as well. Another aspect is there's a lot of legacies on the line. LeBron James obviously wants to play. He said yesterday how he wants to play. He obviously will, but there's a lot at stake for a lot of players in this playoff run. LeBron needs to win a championship as soon as possible to catch Michael Jordan, to continue his legacy. Who knows when he'll get that chance again? He has no idea what the future holds, what next season holds, how the Lakers roster will look, how the rest of the NBA will really look. So just from a LeBron side, that's huge. Also from a Lakers point of view, the Lakers for the past really 6 years up until this year have been a complete dumpster fire. They haven't been the Lakers that we've all known throughout history. This season was really the turning point in showing that the Lakers are back to what they are supposed to be, which is one of the greatest organizations in all of sports. And for that, this potential championship run, especially since the Lakers are an older roster, would be absolutely brutal to them if they didn't finish the season. So the Lakers, which is probably the NBA's, actually it's probably not, it probably is the NBA's biggest brand, definitely wants to play. They all want to play. So I think that's a huge factor as well. Not to mention other big franchise teams like the Lakers, like I mentioned. The Celtics are also a huge contender. We have a potential for a Celtics-Lakers finals this year. That would bring ratings in. Teams like the Rockets are good. Bucks, obviously, with Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis probably wants to finally end the narrative that might be starting soon, that he doesn't win in big moments, and he doesn't have a championship, and he doesn't really have an Eastern Conference championship. He hasn't even been to a finals. Things like that are slowly starting to creep up through the media circles and through NBA fan circles about Giannis' reputation as this great player, but he hasn't really won anything yet in his young career. He obviously would want to come back and win as well. Not to mention other narratives like, James Harden. He already has that narrative. Great player, hasn't won anything. He'll want to come back. So things like that are another reason why I believe that the NBA is going to come back no matter what really happens, that some players might sit out, but I really do believe that the NBA is going to do everything in their power, as they already have, to get this season in, and I really do think it will happen. All right, so for the rest of this segment, I broke into 5 tiers all of the teams that qualified and will be playing in Orlando. So there are teams such as like the Knicks and other bad organizations and bad teams like that aren't on this tier list. Let's just call them tier 6 because they didn't even make the cut to go to Orlando and even participate into potentially making the playoffs. So I've broken them into 5 tiers. We'll go 5 to 1, and I'll explain to you why I have each team in this tier and how it's going to, kind of work and where I think they could be and what their ceiling is as an NBA team. All right, let's start at the 5th tier, which is teams that were invited to Orlando but won't make the playoffs. In that category, I have the Wizards in the East, the Kings in the West, the Suns in the West as well. So they're all going to play their 8 regular season games and potentially play in a play-in tournament for that potential 8th seed in each of their conference. I don't think those 3 teams will make the playoffs at all. I would bet money on it. I think their season will end after 8 games in Orlando, and they'll be looking forward to next season. All right, next up is number 4, which is a tier that I consider maybe making the playoffs, but if they were to make the playoffs, it would be an early elimination. For that, I have the San Antonio Spurs, the Portland Trail Blazers, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Orlando Magic, and the New Orleans Pelicans. So these are the teams that I think that some of them, obviously not all of them can make the playoffs, but I believe some of them will. I think the Magic will make the playoffs, and I think if I had to guess that the Grizzlies are the current 8th seed, I could see them sticking in, but I wouldn't be surprised if Dame Lillard turns it on, the Trailblazers make the playoffs, get that 8th seed in the play-in tournament, or, Zion and the Pelicans, who knows how they're going to look. They're young, they're energetic. Zion only played about 20 games. That's all we got to see of him. So I really do believe that Zion can make some noise. And the Spurs are obviously, I put the Spurs in this category, even though they are losing LaMarcus Aldridge for the rest of the year, purely because of Greg Popovich. And I know he can coach in big moments and coach in big games, so it wouldn't surprise me if they snuck in as well. I don't want to count them out and put them in the won't make the playoffs category. All right, so now we're getting into number 3. The 3rd tier are teams that definitely will make the playoffs, in my opinion, but they could or maybe make some noise. They could win a series or two, but they're not going to make it to the conference finals. They're not going to make a championship, and they're not going to win a championship. So I'm going to go more in depth with these teams here. All right, so first up I have the Philadelphia 76ers, who are a really interesting team because they're super talented with Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, and they have some shooters, not as much as you would like to see. Al Horford's obviously on that team, Brett Brown the coach. I know there's going to be some people that think that the 76ers are a title contender. They absolutely can be if they get it together. I just don't trust the organization. I don't trust the 76ers. I don't trust the chemistry between Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid on the court to be able to make that happen. I think they could beat up on some bad teams. For example, if they had the Magic in the first round, if they had a bad team in the first round, I could definitely see that. But it appears that they're probably going to face somebody a little bit higher than them, like the Heat, maybe the Raptors, Pacers, teams like that I have trust with more on-the-floor chemistry and good matchups, while the 76ers are kind of moving away from the current game. The current game of the NBA seems to be three-point shooters and driving to the basket, driving kick sort of stuff, pick and roll. The 76ers seem to be a paint, back-to-the-basket type of team, which just doesn't work in the NBA anymore, and I really don't trust the 76ers to get their act together and really fully formulate and group to the team that we all know they can be, especially in only those 8 short games with a training camp, obviously, heading into the playoffs. Next, I have the Indiana Pacers, who are a good team. They're a good story. I just don't think they're talented enough to make it to the next level in the Eastern Conference. I like Victor Oladipo. He looked really rusty when he came back from his injury. Malcolm Brogdon was obviously hurt for a little bit. Miles Turner, Sabonis. They have good players. I like their coach, Nate McMillan, a lot, actually. But I don't think they are a multiple series win type of team. They could definitely win a first round series. I don't see them winning, a second round series or even a third round series, personally. Next up is the Brooklyn Nets, who I think they're going to make the playoffs, but Kyrie Irving already said he's not playing. Kevin Durant's not playing. I don't see them getting any better. Their best player would be Spencer Dinwiddie going into this playoff series. Again, similar to the Pacers, just don't think they're talented enough. They could maybe win a first round series, definitely not more than that. Obviously, they got rid of their coach and they have an interim coach right now, so that won't help the situation either. I think Brooklyn overall is looking forward to next year when they do get Kyrie back, KD back, and I'm assuming Tyronn Lue will be the coach of that team after he leaves probably the Clippers to go to be the head coach of the Nets. So the Nets are a good team. They're an interesting team. I would have a completely different answer if Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant were both playing. If they were both playing, I'd probably put them in the category right above this, or even contenders. But with so much all of their injuries, and since they don't really have an established head coach, and Spencer Dinwiddie's their best player, no shade towards Spencer Dinwiddie, I just don't think he can be the best player on a real contending team. Next up in this third category is the Oklahoma City Thunder, who I love. I love Chris Paul. I'm a huge fan of Chris Paul. I always have been. I just don't, again, trust the level of skill, especially in the Western Conference, when they're going to have to go against teams like the Rockets, the Nuggets, the Clippers, the Lakers. Again, they could beat a Spurs. They could beat the Pelicans. They could beat the Trailblazers, the Grizzlies. Those teams in the first round, I could definitely see that happening. With Chris Paul as a veteran, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had an exploding year this year, a breakout season averaging 20 points a game, which was awesome to see. I could really see the Thunder, like this category says, could make some noise, will make the playoffs. Definitely not a multiple series win team. Again, I like Chris Paul. I like their coach. I like Billy Donovan. They've done a fantastic job in this rebuild. Sam Presti got all those picks. It looked like the Thunder are going to be one of the worst teams in the league. Instead, they're the 7th seed in the West, pushing to potentially be even higher after this playoffs / regular season play-in tournament. So the Thunder, for me, round out probably the top of the will make the playoffs category, could make some noise. And the final team I have in this category is the Utah Jazz, who I like a lot. I love Donovan Mitchell. I think he's a great, explosive young player. I think he's actually getting, to be honest with you, into that underrated range where I'm not understanding why we don't appreciate him more. And, we're talking about all these other young players like John Morant, Zion Williamson, even Trae Young, Luka Doncic. When Donovan Mitchell didn't go anywhere, he's still a great player, still averaging 22 points a game. I really love what the Utah Jazz have been doing. I like Rudy Gobert. There's been rumors about the chemistry between him and Donovan Mitchell not being so great. I think they'll get it worked out. I really like the way that, Utah plays. They play good defense. They have shooters. They did lose Bogdanovich for the rest of the year, which is a huge impact, which is why I have them in this category. Also, Mike Conley has been kind of a flop this year. I really thought that he would be better than he was when they, obviously got him from the Memphis Grizzlies. I really thought he'd be that great veteran leader point guard that would make plays, that would average 18 plus, and that just hasn't been Mike Conley this season. He's been inefficient. I think he's even come off the bench for certain spurts of the season, which is kind of sad to see. If he could get it together, that could really elevate this Jazz team, especially since Bogdanovich won't be playing. It'll be really interesting to see how the Utah Jazz do, especially after the whole coronavirus thing between Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, and the rest of the Jazz. But again, they round out the could make noise and they definitely will make the playoffs, but I don't think they're contenders. All right, now I'm going to get into the second category, which is fringe contenders. These are teams that I think could win multiple playoff series, and their ceiling would be going to an Eastern Conference or a Western Conference championship, but I don't see them going to the finals. I'm going to start with the Denver Nuggets, who I like a lot. The Denver Nuggets are just so young, man. I really wanted to put them in the contender spot. I really like Jokic, and if you've seen recently, he actually lost a ton of weight, and he looks like a completely different human being. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Jokic looks, how Jokic plays on the court, how his athleticism is. Maybe he's more athletic than we thought he was. It's going to be really cool to see. I love Jamal Murray. I love Mike Malone. Again, I love Jokic, one of my favorite bigs in the league. Probably the best, actually, definitely the best passing big in the league. One of the best stretch fives in the league as well. Again, they're definitely going to win a series or two. I could definitely see them going to the Western Conference Finals. It's just when you stack them up against other Western Conference contenders like the Clippers or the Lakers, it's hard to see the Nuggets winning a 7-game series against those teams and potentially making it to the NBA Finals. However, I really like their team. They seem one piece away. In the offseason, if they could get a Bradley Beal, another scorer, another athletic wing to support Jokic and Jamal Murray, this team could be a contender in the next couple of years. Next up, I have the Houston Rockets, one of the most polarizing teams. They're a fringe contender as well. Again, like James Harden, don't love him. He doesn't perform in the playoffs. I've seen, comparisons to him being a sport car. Great in the fall, great in, the summer, terrible in the winter. And that's what it appears that James Harden is. Russell Westbrook seems to be pretty similar as well, and they're obviously teammates now in Houston. They had a great season together. Russell Westbrook looked great. James Harden looked great. I think they're going to be fun to watch in the playoffs. Again, they can beat a Thunder, a Jazz, a Pelicans. But this is all comes down to, can you beat the Clippers or can you beat the Lakers in a 7-game series, especially if you're in the West? And I just don't trust James Harden and Russell Westbrook to be that clutch in a playoff series for 7 games. So that's just my personal opinion on the Rockets. I know some people have them as a contender. I don't like Mike D'Antoni. It wouldn't surprise me if he gets relieved of his duties after this season at all. But definitely for me, the Rockets are a fringe contender, and they're probably towards the bottom of the fringe contenders after I read you off the rest of this list. I have 2 more teams in the fringe contenders category, and they're both in the East. The first one is the defending championship team, the Toronto Raptors. I love the Raptors. I love Nick Nurse. I love the way they play defense. I love Pascal Siakam. He's taken even another leap after winning, I think, Most Improved last year, being that second option to Kawhi Leonard. He's taken another big step. He looks like a great first option. They play fantastic defense. Marc Gasol's still pretty effective for them. Fred VanVleet has taken a pretty big step this year as well. I think he's actually averaging 18 plus now, which is crazy to think about. I like them. I think they'll win a couple of series. They're really hard to beat in Toronto, man. They are a tough home team to beat, especially once you get later and later into the season. They're riding that championship experience. They brought almost all of their team back outside of their best player, Kawhi Leonard. We're having a totally different conversation if the Raptors have Kawhi Leonard. They would absolutely be a contender again. But due to no Kawhi Leonard, I don't see them being at the top of the Eastern Conference again. However, I could definitely see them making the Eastern Conference Finals. And the last of the fringe contenders I have is the Miami Heat. I really like the way that the Heat play defense. The main reason why they're up here, honestly, is because they have such a good record against the rest of the Eastern Conference teams. They have beaten the Bucks twice, they have beaten the Raptors twice, and they have beaten the 76ers and the Pacers twice. So they are undefeated. They have 1 loss to the 76ers. So they are undefeated against the Bucks, undefeated against the Raptors, undefeated against the Pacers, and only 1 loss to the 76ers, which kind of round out the rest of the East in their kind of area. So that's the reason why they're in fringe contenders. If they're in the West, obviously this wouldn't happen. I absolutely love Bam Adebayo. I think he's one of the best up-and-coming bigs in the league. I love Tyler Hero. Jimmy Butler's obviously an absolute animal, and I think the rest will serve him well on his body as he was carrying such a big load for the Miami Heat. But again, when you compare them to the Milwaukee Bucks, can they beat the Milwaukee Bucks in the 7-game series? Can they beat the Boston Celtics in the 7-game series, who I'll get to in a minute? The Heat are 0-2 against the Celtics this year. I really believe that the Heat, if they could add one more piece up Pat Riley's sleeve, could they get a Bradley Beal, then they could be in the contender category. But right now they're in the fringe contender category. Finally, the last tier I have out of all the NBA teams that made it to the Orlando kind of play-in round or playoffs, finishing off the regular season, whatever you want to call it, is the contender category. And while I mentioned before there is a lot of parity in the NBA, and it's absolutely great, there's only 4 contenders in my opinion. I really do believe one of these 4 teams is going to win the NBA championship. Let's start off in the East. So I think there's 2 contenders out of the East. Obviously the Milwaukee Bucks, who are the best team in the league record-wise. Love Giannis Antetokounmpo. He should definitely be an MVP candidate, even though I think LeBron should win it. Should get heavily consideration. He's an absolute animal, arguably the best player in the league. I love everything about him. I love the team they've constructed around him. I like Mike Budenholzer. I like Lopez shooting on the wing. I like Chris Middleton, even though I don't think he performs in as big moments. I think this year is the year Giannis is going to change the narrative. I really do believe that he's going to get at least to the Eastern Conference Finals, if not go all the way to the finals. I think this is the year that he kind of ends the narrative of he doesn't win a lot, he doesn't win the big games, things like that. You know he's going to put in big numbers. And I really don't see a team that can defend him for 7 games. There might be games where you can slow him down, but it's hard to see in the playoffs how he's not going to get his 30 points a game. It's going to be really hard to see, maybe could the Heat do it? I don't think so. The Raptors, even though they play great defense, I think they could tame Giannis. I just don't see them being the ones that really shut Giannis down by any stretch of the imagination. All right, so the other team in the East that I think is a potential contender, who I actually do believe could potentially stop Giannis Antetokounmpo, is the Boston Celtics. I absolutely love Jason Tatum. He's one of my favorite players in the league. He's maybe the best, you could really argue he's the best young wing in this league right now. His scoring ability, his athleticism, his defense even, is all absolutely off the charts. I love Jason Tatum. I love everything about him. I need Kemba Walker to be the number 1 man on this team, though. If Jason Tatum is the number 1 option on the Boston Celtics throughout the playoffs, they'll definitely win a couple series. I don't think that makes them a championship winner, though. I think Kemba Walker needs to be the best player on this team, with Jason Tatum as a close second and Jaylen Brown as a close third, for the Celtics to be able to compete with the Bucks, Clippers, and Lakers. I think that can they do it? I absolutely think they can do it. Will they do it? That's a different question. I love Brad Stevens. I love the way he coaches defense. The Boston Celtics, I think, are maybe the most athletic team in the league, and they're definitely one of the longest teams in the league, which is why I think they have a chance of stopping Giannis Antetokounmpo in the playoffs, is they can throw different mismatches at him. They can throw a Jaylen Brown at him. They can throw a Jason Tatum at him. They can throw other guys at him, and that could frustrate Giannis, and that could be tough on him. Not to mention the Celtics have had Giannis' number not only this year, but in playoffs in the past too. They have eliminated him before, so they've dealt with him, and Brad Stevens has coached against him in the playoffs. All right, now let's move to the West on the 2 teams that I think have the best chance of winning the NBA championship. I think one of these 2 teams are going to be an NBA champion this year, and that's the Los Angeles Clippers and the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, I would almost guarantee you these are the 2 we're going to face in the Western Conference Finals, barring an injury or something like that. I don't even know who I would take if you ask me right now. I love LeBron James. Obviously, I think he deserves to win MVP this year. In my opinion, he's still the top. He's switched to point guard this year, reinvented himself yet again. Great assist ratio to turnover ratio, passes the ball, he's improved his shooting. Free throws still a struggle, but that doesn't matter. He's always going to get his. I love Anthony Davis. I was talking about Bam Adebayo, best young and up-and-coming big. Anthony Davis is probably the best big in the entire NBA right now, if you don't consider Giannis a big. Now, if they went to the finals and they went against the Bucks, Anthony Davis is a guy who could guard Giannis Antetokounmpo and give him some trouble, in my opinion. So that's one of the reasons why I think the Lakers would edge out the Bucks in a 7-game series. But I think the real series to be had in the playoffs right now is Clippers versus Lakers. The Clippers obviously have Kawhi Leonard, who has gone through battles with LeBron James time and time again. They're pretty even, honestly, in my opinion. I would like the addition of Paul George. I need Paul George to step up in those big moments that he's failed to do in years past. I need playoff P, like he always likes to say, to come in, drop a 30-pointer, drop 35 points in a playoff game. Don't have it all be on Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, Lou Williams is a great person off the bench to have those 20 points, Montrezl Harrell as well. And I think that is going to be one of the reasons why they could potentially edge out the Lakers, is because of how deep their bench is. Because there isn't anybody on the Lakers bench that can come close to guarding Lou Williams or a Montrezl Harrell. And there's not even that many guys in the starting lineup that could guard, Lou Williams in, just in a one-on-one situation right now. Because you already know that the Clippers are probably going to close with Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell out there on the court. And that's going to be hard for the Lakers to contain, especially when their 2 best players, LeBron and Anthony Davis, carry such a large load on the offensive court. So those are the 2 teams in the West that I think I could do. I think this series would go deep. It'd go 6 or 7. If I had to pick one, if I absolutely had to pick one, I would pick the Lakers, only because I think the rest will serve them well, being one of the older rosters in the league, and I really do think this is LeBron's year to reestablish himself as the king and win another championship. But that is it for my tiers list of people who I believe, or not people, excuse me, teams that I believe could make some noise in the playoffs, will win the contenders. Those 5, tiers that I just listed off earlier. I really do believe that that's how the NBA season is going to turn out. I think the Lakers will be the champion, probably facing the Bucks, but don't be surprised. I won't be surprised if the Celtics edge out the Bucks as well. All right, we're going to take one final break, and on the other side of this break, we will get to the last segment of the day, which is my top 10 NBA players of all time. So you want to stick around for that, and we'll see you on the other side of the break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back with the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's episode. So the final segment, I want to give you guys my top 10 NBA players of all time. And, after the Michael Jordan documentary, there came a lot of, debates, rankings about, people's top 10, top 5, top 2 greatest players of all time. Recently, Magic Johnson announced that he will be doing a documentary as well on his NBA career, which will be really awesome to see. It'll be dropping in 2021. So I want to give you guys my top 10 greatest NBA players of all time. And, it's probably, when we talk about top 10 players in sports, usually NBA is the one with the most controversy, with the most debate, with the most talking points. So here are mine. We'll just get right into it here. And if we have time at the end, I'll also be giving you guys a player or two who barely missed the cut, who are current players, who by the end of their playing careers might actually end up on the top 10 greatest of all time list. So let's start with number 10, and that is Tim Duncan of the San Antonio Spurs, the greatest power forward of all time. Love Tim Duncan. When it comes to Tim Duncan, I think he was one of the most underrated players in the entire league at the time. I don't think we actually appreciated his greatness and how good he really was, how many championships he won, that he was, after, he was drafted with David Robinson, obviously, and then the years with Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Danny Green, Greg Popovich obviously gets a majority of the credit for the Spurs. You can even call it a dynasty. However, I think Tim Duncan was really the main driving force there. No franchise is great without its signature player. He embodied the San Antonio Spurs way, on that system and Spurs culture and things like that. And I really think that, Tim Duncan, at first glance, some people don't understand why he's on top 10 lists, but he's really the greatest power forward of all time, and he really deserves, I think he had almost a 20-year playing career, and he was really good in, always consistent. Even in those finals that he played in against the Miami Heat in 2012, 2013, he was still one of the best players on the court, and definitely one of the best players, if not the best player for the Spurs at the time. So, Mr. Consistency, I give that number 10 spot to Tim Duncan. Number 9, I have Shaquille O'Neal, the unstoppable man himself. He's on my top 10 list specifically because of how unstoppable he was. I think when I think of a big man, even though I do have some big men rated ahead of Shaquille O'Neal at number 9, but when I think of a big center in the NBA, Shaquille O'Neal is actually the first one that comes to my mind. He was a great personality for the NBA. Obviously, he was a 3-time NBA champion with the Los Angeles Lakers, and then he got a championship as well with the Miami Heat. His career obviously fell off a little bit at the end. I think he's one of the greatest, unstoppable forces that this league has ever seen, both offensively and defensively. It's really fun to watch. We're not watch anymore, but it really was fun to watch Shaquille O'Neal highlights to this day. He's awesome on TV as well. So Shaquille O'Neal comes in at number 9 for me, and he'll end up being, I believe, I think he's a top 5 big man of all time, maybe even top 4. You can argue with some other people I'll say later on, but I think Shaquille O'Neal definitely deserves to be on my NBA top 10 players of all time list. Number 8, I have the late, great Kobe Bryant. Kobe, I think towards the end of his career, people weren't necessarily considering him a top 10 player of all time. I definitely think he's the second greatest shooting guard ever behind Michael Jordan, who I'll talk about later. But Kobe, a 5-time NBA champion with the Lakers. Magic Johnson, who I'll talk about later on in this list, said that he was the greatest Los Angeles Laker ever. And I think Magic Johnson knows a thing or two about the Los Angeles Lakers and what they're like and what their standard is. He was really the last semblance of Lakers greatness up until this season that we might see with LeBron, obviously. But when I think of Los Angeles Lakers, for my generation in particular, it's Kobe Bryant. And I think that he was such an energetic player. His Mamba mentality is something that'll carry on through generations and generations of NBA players. You roll up like a piece of trash and throw it in the trash can and yell Kobe every time you shoot it. His impact on the game also, for me, impacts why he's on this list. And he's also ahead of Shaq and Tim Duncan. He's ahead of Shaq for championship reasons. I think he was a better overall player than Tim Duncan, which is why he's ahead of Tim Duncan as well. But when you are considered by a lot of people the greatest player on the greatest organization in that sport, you have to make a top 10 list. Even though I don't necessarily agree with Magic Johnson that Kobe's the greatest Laker of all time, he's definitely the second best shooting guard of all time. Definitely deserves to be on this list. So number 8 for me is Kobe Bryant. Number 7 for me is Larry Bird. You could argue that he's the greatest Celtic of all time. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but Larry Bird was really awesome because him and Magic Johnson really saved the NBA. There's been books written about this, how when the NBA, when it was Bird versus Magic, ratings were at a low. There was no one really carrying the league. And, Bird and Magic, there's a great saying that, Bird and Magic saved the NBA. Michael Jordan made it global. LeBron James made it mobile. Things like that. So Larry Bird shouldn't be underestimated, his impact. Not necessarily just on the sport of basketball with his, 3-point shooting ability. His underrated athleticism, his underrated passing skills, his championships. But when I think of the Boston Celtics, I think of Larry Bird. And I think that without him, who knows where the NBA would be today? Who knows where the NBA would have been when he was playing against Magic Johnson? And we got some of the best, maybe even one of the best rivalries in sports history between those Celtics and those Lakers teams. So Larry Bird comes in number 7 for me. Number 6 is another Celtic. It's Bill Russell, who has the most NBA championships out of anybody. The main argument against Bill Russell is that he didn't play against anybody because of his league, but Bill Russell, for me, is on this list for what he did with, the color barrier, everything like that. His domination over, a 15-year period. Not just as a player, he was also a coach at a certain point. Bill Russell's impact on the game is really second to none, on society as well. His activism, things like that. So I really believe that Bill Russell doesn't get enough credit. I see when people make these top 10 lists that Bill Russell's on the lower half, in the 10s, just because he didn't play anybody. I don't want to overlook Bill Russell's greatness, his ability, his height, and yes, there was no 3-point line. Yes, he didn't necessarily play anybody, but Bill Russell is still one of the greatest NBA players of all time, and I really don't think there's much of a debate to it that he definitely deserves to be on this list, and I have him as number 6. Number 5, one of the greatest big men of all time, Wilt Chamberlain, obviously averaged 50 points a game, absolutely ridiculous. You can argue the same things about him you do with Bill Russell, that he didn't play anybody, the level of competition was low. Nevertheless, he absolutely dominated his era. He was the best player in the NBA by far. Really awesome. Unfortunately, he died relatively young, but when you think about Wilt Chamberlain, you just think of an absolute animal and you think of absolute domination. And I really think that Wilt Chamberlain also gets kind of slandered when it comes to these lists, that people don't put him as high as they should be. You could really argue, there are definitely people that argue that Wilt Chamberlain's a top 3 player of all time. I have him at number 5. Definitely a top 3 big man of all time. Definitely, I have him as top 2. So Wilt Chamberlain is another one of those players that you go with Bill Russell that I think people overestimate how truly great they were just because of the eras they played in and how it's not really, doesn't necessarily relate to the modern game. I think that Wilt Chamberlain still absolutely was a dominant force in the NBA for years and years and decades. And I think he absolutely deserves to be on this list. And I think number 5 is a really good spot for him. All right. Now we get to number 4, where I have Magic Johnson. I think Magic Johnson is maybe behind LeBron James is probably the most versatile player of all time. His ability to pass, shoot, stretch the floor, his layup package, everything about Magic Johnson was awesome. He was an absolute superstar. I already talked about how him and Larry Bird would go at it, and those gave us some of the greatest, rivalries of all time. And a lot of people arguably believe that it saved the NBA as a league overall, that the league wasn't doing well financially and that we're struggling. But the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird era really saved it and revitalized it. He was a huge inspiration to a lot of players, huge competition. Him and Michael Jordan, as we saw in the Michael Jordan documentary, MJ wanted to do everything that Magic did, everything Magic accomplished. I think Magic Johnson is also a really good ambassador of the NBA, a really good face of the NBA. He's extremely likable. You can argue about who the greatest Laker is of all time, but if you don't include Magic Johnson in that conversation, I can't help you. I absolutely love Magic Johnson. Everything he, does on the court, off the court. He had a kind of a rough ending with the Lakers as their kind of like general manager type thing. But as a player, you can't underestimate Magic Johnson's greatest. Definitely the greatest point guard of all time, in my opinion. Best passer of all time, in my opinion, as well. So, yeah, that's Magic Johnson. And now we're getting into top three, where this is where the debates really start to get going. Number 3, I have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who is the greatest big man of all time NBA leading scorer as a big man. Just overall, out of any position, he scored the more points than anybody else and still has that record to this day. Obviously, was it great for the Milwaukee Bucks and the Los Angeles Lakers. In my opinion, he's the greatest Laker of all time. There are a lot of people who actually argue that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the greatest player of all time. People who watched him, people who got to experience Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and I can definitely see why you're making that case. But Kareem scored more than anybody and got a ton of championships as well. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is one of my favorite players of all time to still watch to this day. The skyhook is undefeated. It's so cool to watch in his highlights from YouTube. If you just look how many times he got, that skyhook over all-time NBA great players, it's really awesome to see. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is also an awesome person off the court, great ambassador for the league, civil rights, everything like that, social justice, everything. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a good spot, number 3. And now we've gotten to the top 2 NBA players of all time. You already know what this debate is for. It's Michael Jordan or it's LeBron James. And I just want to get into this debate real quick. I've mentioned this before, but Michael Jordan and LeBron James, it's really hard to compare the two. They're two completely different players. They play really completely two different ways of playing basketball. Michael Jordan was obviously Air Jordan, high-flying, all over the place, athleticism. LeBron James is more of a bruiser when he gets to the basket. He shoots a lot more than MJ ever did. People will argue that Michael Jordan's a better defender, but I think LeBron James, through certain spurts of his NBA career, specifically with like the 2013 Heat, early on in the Cavs, you could definitely argue that he was a better defender than Michael Jordan. I wouldn't say that overall for a career, but so at number 2, I have LeBron James, and that's not a shot at LeBron James. LeBron James is the greatest basketball player ever since Michael Jordan, and he's better than any other player not named Michael Jordan. And who knows, like if he really wins a couple more championships, if he ever got to 6, or really if he ever got to 5, and then took the scoring championship from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you can definitely absolutely make the argument that LeBron James passed Michael Jordan. However, at this point in time, I just don't see it. LeBron is obviously a 3-time NBA champion. I do think he'll end up winning more championships when his career is said and done. He's obviously the only current player on this list. But LeBron James, man, I've gotten to grow up when watching him, and I have to say, I think it's kind of criminal how we underestimate LeBron, because our expectation with LeBron is Michael Jordan level. Well, he didn't hit every game winner. Well, he didn't win every single game. He's not, 6-0 in the finals, things like that. But we really need to start pivoting that to just appreciating how great LeBron James is. Because when LeBron James is gone, he is gone. And there isn't going to be someone replacing him that is just as good as him, that is just as talented as him, that's just as influential as him. So for me personally, we really need to start, respecting LeBron James more. Again, I think he'll end up beating Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's record in points and probably win another championship, maybe 2, to solidify his career as the most versatile player of all time as well. One of the best passers of all time, second to only Magic Johnson in my opinion. One of the best driving, power players, slashers of all time as well. Has evolved himself. And you know what? One of the biggest things about LeBron James, I'll mention this quickly, is how he has reinvented himself over his career. LeBron James came into this league as scrawny and, skinny and just super athletic, getting through him, Michael Jordan-like. Then towards his end of his career with the Cavaliers, the first stint, went to Miami. He got bigger. He would pass more. He would shoot. Straight up scorer. Obviously won MVPs. Obviously won championships. Absolutely incredible. Goes back to the Cavs a second time and does everything for them. Triple doubles all the time. Passing, shooting, scoring. Really carrying that franchise again after leaving them the first time. And now that he's on the Los Angeles Lakers, he has reinvented himself again, this time as a point guard. Let me get this right. LeBron James has gone from a scrawny small forward for the Cavaliers the first time and reinvented himself all the way now, later in his career, in his late 30s, to a point guard. And not only that, he is the best point guard in the league, which is absolutely crazy to think about how LeBron does this. Most versatile player of all time, maybe my favorite player of all time, if I'm being honest. I don't understand how you can hate on his greatness. I understand that people want to compare him to Michael Jordan all the time, but make sure you understand and respect LeBron James' greatness. Number one, obviously, Michael Jordan, 6 championships. Absolutely love the documentary. I talked about it before, how awesome it is, how it showed the real raw side of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, for me, is the greatest player of all time because of how relentless he was, his mentality. I think they showed that in the documentary, how Michael Jordan would be like, this guy said this to me, and that made it personal for me. And then I would drop 45 on his head, and that to me was really awesome to see. And that's how MJ was. That's how MJ still is. He just dominated people all the time. Domination from the start, domination from the finish. There's always theories about what if he didn't go to baseball? Could he have won more championships? And that's definitely possible, a definite argument to meet. But the 2-time three-peat, when Michael Jordan got the first three-peat, no one had ever done that. Not to mention that he's done it twice now, which is absolutely incredible. Michael Jordan, for me, greatest player of all time, most relentless player of all time, greatest, everything. Scorer, arguably defender, absolutely incredible. Michael Jordan, number one. But LeBron James could definitely get there eventually. All right, so with the last few minutes I have in this segment, I want to talk about some current players that have the potential to make it to the all-time, top 10 list, past players on the bottom like a Shaq or a Tim Duncan. Number one, I want to start with Steph Curry, who's the greatest shooter of all time. I saw that Rob Parker said that he can't be the greatest shooter of all time because he's never won a Finals MVP. I disagree with that take. I think Steph Curry is clearly the greatest shooter of all time. I mean, when you're talking about players who have revolutionized the game of basketball, Steph Curry is one of them. He has practically eliminated back to the basket centers from the NBA. He has revolutionized three-point shooting. If you're a guard and you can't shoot, you don't play. If you're a center and you can't shoot or you can't defend the three-point line, you don't play. And that is because of Steph Curry and what he has done with the Golden State Warriors. Now, I understand he's never won a Finals MVP. In my opinion, the one that Andre Iguodala won should have gone to Steph Curry. I think a lot of people agree with me on that one. Steph Curry is the greatest shooter of all time, and who knows, with the current state of the Warriors, if they did get a high draft pick, traded for somebody, God forbid they got Giannis Antetokounmpo in free agency in a couple years, Steph could end up with even more championships than he already has. But for me, to people that don't think Steph is the greatest shooter of all time or one of the greatest point guards of all time, I think Steph Curry is already top 3 point guards of all time. I would even argue he's the second greatest point guard of all time behind Magic Johnson. But Steph Curry could definitely be somebody who gets at the top of this list. Some other current players that I think don't have as a great shot as Steph Curry does to get into the top 10 conversation players of all time. Kevin Durant's one of the most unguardable players ever, unstoppable force. I know this is kind of a weird comparison, but he's almost like a modern day Shaquille O'Neal. Obviously they don't play the same at all and they're not the same body type, but the way Shaquille O'Neal was absolutely unguardable during his day, Kevin Durant is too. Kevin Durant is 6'11", 6'10", can shoot from anywhere on the floor, super athletic, great defender as well. I can't wait to see KD come back. I feel like because of the injury, everyone has forgotten about Kevin Durant and how great he is. But when he comes back for the Brooklyn Nets, I don't know if the Nets will win a championship necessarily, but Kevin Durant will definitely be one of the best players in the league despite the Achilles injury. Some other players I have listed here just real quick before we wrap up the show for today. Giannis Antetokounmpo, completely unproven, hasn't done anything yet, but I think he could be up there as well. And, Zion Williamson has this X factor. I know it's super early in his career, but, Zion Williamson, you can make the argument if his career pans out the way people think he could be an all-time great. And finally, I want to quickly talk about James Harden. James Harden could honestly go down as one of the greatest offensive players of all time. If he were to win a championship or two, you could definitely make the argument that he's top 15 or who knows, if he wins multiple championships, you could argue that he's better than a Tim Duncan, just because of his, offensive prowess and his offensive unstoppability. So those are some current players that I believe could also have a chance to become all-time greats, in the top 10 regard for that as well. I want to thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. It means a lot to us that you checked it out today. Make sure you follow this show, you subscribe to the podcast so you get alerts so you know when a new episode drops each and every time. Make sure you follow us on social media as well, Twitter, Facebook, everything like that. And thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you all very soon.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.